Medical disclaimer. This podcast is intended for educational purposes only and does not serve as medical advice. Kate and Jon are not medical professionals. This podcast is not intended to diagnose, treat, or prevent any illness. Always consult your physician before making lifestyle changes. Trigger warning. This episode contains material of a highly sensitive nature, including topics such as sexual abuse, self-harm, mental illness, and eating disorders, which may be triggering for some individuals. If you have past traumas relating to these areas, you may want to consider skipping this episode. Welcome back to the Illuminated Path. This is episode 39. What are we talking about today?
So May is Mental Health Awareness Month. So we wanted to do a conversation on mental health, but really seeing it from a holistic approach. Which honestly, like struggling with my own mental health is kind of what led me to even go the route of working with a holistic life coach and then eventually becoming a holistic life coach. So
Yeah, same. Not becoming a holistic life coach, but my struggles with mental health are what eventually inevitably led me to a holistic path.
Yeah.
So, how's the week? Let's start there.
Good. So my sister got married.
Yep.
I know I've been talking about it a bunch, and the day was incredible and so much happened, and then it was all over.
It was a beautiful day. I think it was just there was so much leading up to it and so much happening, and yeah, it just flew by.
Yeah. Most importantly, they were just happy and just loved how everything came out, and
Yeah.
everything was just beautiful. It was so great, like seeing all my family that flew in from out of town, and we were dancing on the dance floor with my little cousins. They were doing break dancing.
You got me to dance.
It was great.
Yeah.
And you liked it.
So Kate told me, I usually don't dance. And Kate told me, she said, you dance or it's the marriage.
I didn't say it like that. I said, promise me on our marriage or promise me on our wedding or something that you will.
It still sounded like a threat.
And it was fun, wasn't it?
It was good. We had a good time.
Yeah. So we practiced beforehand too.
Yep.
So it was good.
Came out good. Yeah. So I want to kind of preface this episode with this is, obviously we're not doctors. We're also not providing legal advice because I have something I do want to share later on. But I think it's important to kind of keep an open mind, especially when we talk about a holistic approach, because it's very different, and it's in many ways contradicts sort of what the mainstream teaches. And there's reasons for that. There's reasons and ways that is validated, and I would argue more valid, but this isn't meant to shame anyone. It's not meant to say this is the only way, but there's a lot of things that are missing from the typical approach of conventional medicine to mental health.
Right.
And so I think it's important for us to touch on that today.
Yeah. And, when we talk about a holistic approach, I've explained what I mean by holistic, but holistic is really viewing yourself, as a human being, as a whole person. You are not just your mind. You are your mind, your body, and your soul, and that makes up who you are. And you can't talk about mental health without talking about the other components that make up who you are. And
Right.
That is the biggest piece that I find is missing. It's like, oh, there's something going on in your mind, and then you're being told like there's something wrong with you, and they diagnose you, and not even taking a look at like how the rest of your life actually is.
Yeah. And I think that's the biggest difference for me from years ago going to through therapy and to a psychiatrist and all that, to being doped up on all kinds of meds all day, every day. There was never really a discussion of like, how are you taking care of yourself? There was never an understanding of how my physical health was connected to my mental health, or my job and my career and my soul, and whether or not I was actually experiencing fulfillment and purpose in my life.
Yeah.
Versus today, working with a naturopathic doctor, And he's always trying to understand, like, what's going on in your life? Where are you at? What sort of stressors do you have? Are you, happy financially in your home, career wise? So I think it's just two very different approaches. But I think this is part of the issue is we have a mental health awareness month, and it looks at it very myopically of we only look at this component.
Yeah, before we recorded, I was looking up kind of just like the whole idea of Mental Health Awareness Month and where it comes from and, different websites that are out there talking about it. And like Mental Health America was one I found. And I started getting really frustrated because it was like, oh, like you're not alone if you have a mental health condition. And it's
Yeah.
like, that's the immediate thing is just looking at like, well, there's something wrong with you. And when you're told there's something wrong with you, it changes the way that you go about things and it
Yeah.
instills so much fear in you that you don't think like to look elsewhere. You're just like, okay, I've been diagnosed with this thing and there's something wrong with me, so I'm just going to listen to whatever I'm being told.
Yeah. And, there's also that progression, right? Of like when I was going through the system, it was we had turned depression into major depressive disorder, and PTSD is now complex PTSD. Like it's all complex. Like it there's this like love for throwing a label on it that then allows people to self-diagnose or identify with something, and it can be really damaging to somebody trying to figure themselves out.
Right.
And I think it really kind of creates an environment where we're telling people they're broken. We're telling people there's something wrong with you, and you have to do this. You have to take the medication. You have to go through this system or take this assessment. And what I want to share is, and we'll talk more about this, but when you take medication, there is, again, not doctors, not legal advice, but that doctor has made the decision that you taking a medication, the benefits, the potential benefits you will receive outweigh the potential risks. That is legally what's occurring. I often disagree with that. And I think a big part of that is that we live in a very convenient world where people often take the first suggestion or the first option.
Right, because it's taking a pill versus changing your entire lifestyle, like how you are literally living.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of work. And
It's
people
work.
don't want to change. And so they're like, oh, well, this is like what I'm being recommended and being told. Again, like you said, the benefits are supposed to outweigh the risks. Great. Sounds good. Like this is, being given to me from a doctor. I trust this doctor, period.
And often the risks aren't always communicated in the detail that they should be.
We were talking to someone about medication and
Yep.
they said, to be honest, I never read the
Yep.
potential like side effects, and the side effects are crazy.
Yeah.
They're crazy.
9 times out of 10, and I've said this before, 9 times out of 10, when you take a medication, one of the side effects of that medication is the very disease or illness that you're trying to treat.
Yeah. Like
Is
it
it
getting
worse or those symptoms, continuing to manifest? So it's, and I always say this too, is like people don't read the trials. If you're on a medication, truly go and read the clinical trials for that medication. And you will often find that the placebo perform just as well. Medications usually barely perform better than the placebo.
Because it's the belief and the thoughts, and that
Yep.
creates your reality.
Absolutely.
I want to get more into like as much as you want to share of your own experience, but before we dive into that, because I know we kind of just did like medication and like all that.
No, we're kind of
Like
jumping around.
what is so a holistic approach? It really asks us to look at the root cause of why we are experiencing symptoms. So when you talk about, and I'm just going to talk about a couple, there's, plenty of other symptoms that people can experience, but anxiety.
Yep.
That is a feeling.
Mm-hmm.
That is a symptom that is triggered within you, and it's based on other things that are happening. So what is the root cause of that feeling? And the symptoms of anxiety, is the tightness of the chest, the shortness of breath, the racing thoughts.
Yeah, muscle tenseness, whatever it is. But that's the symptom management, right? You have anxiety. Let's look at the anxiety.
Right. And everyone experiences this.
Right.
Like,
Right.
there are people who don't experience it on a regular basis because their body is more regulated in a regulated state. But everybody experiences this. So just because like you experience this feeling and it's happening more often,
Mm.
look at why.
Yeah, and I'd like to kind of speak to that if you're okay with that, because I think that, personally, I went through my life always experiencing anxiety. I was diagnosed with, socialized anxiety, generalized anxiety, panic disorder, PTSD. And the thing is, like, we live in a world where if you experience this and we can say that you have this feeling, we tell those people you have a disease and there's something wrong with you.
A disorder, yeah.
And it's kind of this mass brainwashing. Like, you're not diseased because you have some sort of feeling about a particular situation. The reality is there's some type of dysregulation. I couldn't go into social events. I was agoraphobic. I wouldn't leave my apartment. And that didn't like magically just go away because I took some pills. It went away when I did the hard work.
Right. And the same thing for, like depression.
Yep.
Again, depression is a feeling and it's symptoms that you are experiencing based on, there's root causes there. There's circumstances that are creating these feelings for you and you're feeling so down and it's terrible. And
It's usually trauma,
we've
past
both
trauma.
been there
Yeah.
or current situations,
Right.
like the death of a loved one.
Right.
It is so normal to go into a depressive state because that is a lot for you to handle. Like, that's hard.
There's always that distinction, right? Depression is usually looking in the past, anxiety is usually looking forward,
Right.
and we struggle to be present. I personally, having gone through what I went through, I was on sleeping pills, benzodiazepines, antidepressants, mood stabilizers, antipsychotics, the whole, concoction. To today, being on nothing, losing 100 pounds, and being in a very different place and not experiencing those things anymore. It was hard work, but I would go as far as saying mental health as a whole is not really at all what the mainstream calls it. Not everything's a disease. I don't actually believe that these things are diseases. They are natural human emotions and things that are, just like when your sympathetic response is activated, it's a signal to you that there's something going on that you may need to look at and address or work through in a different way.
Right. These symptoms are meant to be communication.
Yeah, from your body.
That something is going on. And that means like figuring out internally what your body needs. And I'm sorry, but a pill isn't what your body needs.
No, and that's the same discussion of like we live in this world of take the weight loss pill, do the doctor's got a pill for that. There's a pill for everything.
Which is simply putting a mask over the symptom and again, not getting to the root cause. So you're just going to experience it, continue experiencing it.
Yeah, I mean, I talked with you about that for many years. When I was on medication, it wasn't like it solved the problem. It really was this like mask of like my emotions were kind of put in a more finite window where like my highs were lower and my lows were higher.
Right.
And it put me in a box. And actually coming off the medication, 5 years later, whatever it was, I felt like I was coming out of a washing machine. I always use that analogy because it was like I was kind of just slowly getting it back and easing back into my emotions and being in tune with myself and actually, being aware of what I was experiencing and feeling.
Yeah. So I've talked about this before. Your feelings are created by thoughts. And people
Yes.
don't like just that alone and being like, I'm not thinking myself into these bad feelings. But
you
that
think
is
you're someone with a mental disease.
right. But that is the reality of the steps that actually happen is like your thoughts, but your thoughts are created by a circumstance. So the circumstance of your body, like that is the circumstance of where you are in your life. And that is what starts to create the thoughts, which then creates those feelings. So how is the health of your body?
Yeah.
You can't have good mental health if your body is in a state of bad health.
Right. Yeah. A lot of mental health, quote unquote, conditions are very easily supported with plants and herbal medicine. And so much so that they stopped actually using plant medicines in clinical trials because it performed very well. And
Mhm.
it was oftentimes difficult for the medication to outperform the plant medicine. The other thing I'll say is that a lot of the receptors in our brain that we use drugs and pharmaceuticals for, those all respond to plant medicines, where we are kind of like artificially stimulating the receptors and things with these synthetic drugs. So, yeah, there's a lot of we're looking at one specific symptom when the reality is there's the root cause that we need to be looking at. And in a holistic approach, we actually do that and look at what's going on with this human as a whole rather than I'm experiencing anxiety, right? And to kind of add on to what you were saying there is like someone who thinks I'm anxious, they typically think it before they actually speak it. And that's kind of the connection and where we've spoken about that awareness piece of you've got to kind of be more in tune with yourself and know, when I am thinking, oh, I'm starting to feel anxious, it's being able to catch that, be present. Why are you anxious? Oh, I'm thinking ahead. I'm worrying about something. And you actually sent me something recently. You said worrying about the problem is like worshiping it.
I love that
I love
a
that
lot.
so much.
It is because you're putting all of your focus and attention on it. So you're just exacerbating the problem because
Yep.
you're making it take up so much space in your mind. And that is
Energy.
right. Like that is where all of your energy and thoughts are going. So, of course, you're going to continue feeling that way. And there's so much you can do for yourself to work through that. But we're
Mm.
not necessarily taught that. And I was even reading on one of those websites before, like about like Mental Health Awareness Month. And it was saying, like, some people will, work on a balanced diet and exercise for helping with mental health. And some people do other things. And I'm like, that how can you say only some people do this? Like that is
Yeah.
a true foundation of health. If
Yeah.
your basic needs are not met, I don't see how you could be in a perfect state of mental health.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've seen a lot of stuff on entrepreneurs talking about how a lot of them don't believe in depression. And it's not saying like people aren't depressed. It's saying it's not this god awful disease that we're telling people it is and that you need this medication. Because what a lot of these guys have found is like typically people who say they're depressed eat like crap, they don't exercise, they spend too much time on their screens. There's all kinds of factors that people think, oh, it's not a big deal, but it adds up. You're not supporting the system. So something as foundational as checking your diet, well, yeah, you've got microplastics, heavy metals, processed foods, sugar, preservatives in your diet. You're going to start to feel that. Your body, your serotonin production is being affected.
The majority of your serotonin is produced in your gut. So if you're not even giving your gut what you need,
95%, National Institute of Health.
then how can you even be producing serotonin and feel good?
Right.
Like you just can't. You're literally not giving your body what it needs.
But here's the kicker.
What?
If 95% is made in your gut, what the hell are we giving antidepressants for?
Good question. I don't know.
Yeah.
There was a whole study about that, about like the SSRIs not even being effective. And
Most research on SSRIs has shown that when you come off of them, you rebound and get far worse depression before your body can re-regulate.
Yeah, because again, it was just a mask. And
Yeah.
so then when you start feeling things again that you were just kind of avoiding, it's like that's all energy that's like stored in you. And like
Yeah.
you were saying before, like it puts your highs lower and your lows higher, and you're just like feeling less and you're in this little window. You're not allowing yourself to feel the emotions. It's like telling someone that, the feelings of depression and sadness and like being anxious, don't feel those. Like we're just going to flat out avoid them rather than work through them.
We've demonized them to the point of dampening the human experience.
We're so scared to feel those emotions.
Right.
Like and like having like a panic attack. It is not a fun thing.
No.
It's not fun. It's not enjoyable. But if that's kind of like what your body's going through at that moment in time, feel it and let it go and like let that energy go through you.
Yeah. And it doesn't mean that you have this awful disease that you're going to be battling for the rest of your life, because I've seen that story over and over again. Somebody gets a panic attack for the first time in their 40s or 50s, and then they go to a doctor. Doctor says, oh, you've got anxiety. Here's some benzodiazepines. But I don't know if people know this. The way they prescribe benzodiazepines, in most cases, they have what's called as needed, or I believe it's PRN or something. But the typical approach is dampen the anxiety by taking it 3 times a day so that it never gets to that point. The problem with that is you're slowing down your central nervous system, you're slowing down your metabolism, you're slowing down your memory, everything, digestion. It's all just getting slowed down and destroyed. I mean, I'm still dealing with, years later, issues with my memory because of how much medication I was on.
Yeah, and for how long. And a quick Google search, if anyone wants to do it, look up how long you're supposed to be on benzodiazepines for. 2 to 4 weeks.
Even antidepressants, most of them were made for 6 weeks.
So you're being put on something and you're on a medication that's meant for 2 to 4 weeks for years. And where is the doctor's role in being like, this is very, very, very temporary? Because it's not. How is that legal or safe?
Well, it's absolutely not safe. The initial kind of approach in pharma was we would put people on, an SSRI or give them a benzodiazepine while they were, grieving the loss of a loved one or going through a difficult time. And it was a very temporary solution. But what we have now is half the country, at this point, probably over half the country, medicated, because we're not really doing the hard work. We're kind of just taking whatever the doctor says, whatever the pharmaceutical industry says. We're watching the ads on TV, and everyone's being brainwashed and programmed to take the pill.
Yeah. And we're just being told like you're doomed to forever struggle with this.
Yeah. So I want to kind of shift into that, because I think that's a really important topic, is when you go to therapy, and none of this is to say like, don't do the work or therapy's bad. Talk therapy helped me tremendously. I did cognitive behavioral therapy. But I also reached a point of, I got what I needed out of it. I think that there's a tendency to ruminate on things, and we've talked about that. But you can go into those situations and end up with, there's something wrong with you. You're broken. You need to be fixed. You need this medication to manage this quote unquote disease that you have. And it is incredibly harmful to someone's mental health. It's incredibly counterintuitive to sit there and be programmed and made to believe that there's something wrong with you.
Mm-hmm. It's also like, there, of course, like all of us have past traumas and past difficulties that maybe we need help working through. And that is perfectly normal and okay. But you have to actually be working with someone who knows how to like guide you through that and be doing things like tapping or EMDR. And I've done a little bit of both of those, but I'm not going to get super into them, but that's actually helping you like process and move through the trauma, like literally helping your body process and like rework it in your brain versus just talking about it. And then you're putting yourself in this completely triggered state and experiencing it over and over and over again.
Yeah. And that's the big one we've talked about. Your brain doesn't know the difference. So if you're just ruminating on traumatic experiences, there's not a whole lot of resolution or things really happening. And, I think that's just kind of a quick point. We've said this before, but like do the work to find the right person, because for me personally, I had a very direct therapist. He was this guy from New York. He was very direct. And I'll share a quick story because we actually just had someone mention this tattoo. But my tattoos are just kind of like stories and things that happened in my life. And one of the most impactful conversations I had with my therapist, I was having these really like intense depressive bouts where I was just numb. I wouldn't move. It was like around the time we had been hanging out, and there was one night I dropped you off and I pulled into a parking lot and I just laid in my back seat for like 2 hours. And I said to him, I was like, I can't move when it happens. And he says to me, he says, but if I held a gun to your head and told you to move, could you move? I said, yeah, I guess. He said, but if I held a gun to a paralyzed person's head and told them to move, could they move? I said, no. And so that is the reason for the revolver on my arm, because it really reminded me that even in those moments of just intense feeling and depression, which does get more complex to navigate when you're on medication, there's a choice there. There's a level of choice that we're making. And often for people who are depressed or anxious, it's choosing to ruminate in it. It's choosing to wallow. And so getting out of that requires a conscious decision.
Right. And that's why it's so important. Like when you are looking for help and support, you are with someone who has the belief and wants to instill the belief in you that you can. You
Right.
can work through this. You can do better, because your beliefs are everything for how you move forward and how you take action.
Yeah.
If you are just being told this is what you are forever and you're stuck here and you're never going to get past this, that is what you believe and that is how you take action. And so you do have the belief of, I can't. And when someone's supporting you on that, like, yeah, you can. I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
No, you
And-
can. But the
and-
belief is everything.
Right. And it's awful to like think about in the sense of, it's not that these people aren't trying to help you, but there's a level of like, this is what they were trained. This is how they were trained.
Right.
So absolutely do the work to find the right person for you, someone who's going to empower you rather than disempower you and encourage you and enable you to wallow. So with that, I would say get very far away from people who are programming you to believe that there's something wrong with you that has to be fixed. Because for as long as I believed that, I was caught in the system.
Yeah.
It doesn't work.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen several different therapists. I started working with like a social worker in high school, and that was when I first started experiencing like depression. And at that time, I was kind of told like, you might have depression. And I was like, oh my God, there's something wrong with me.
Mm-hmm.
And I would talk about things, and it was helpful to have that support. But there was a lot of times where I was working with a therapist who was kind of just there to like listen and allow me to express myself and talk through things so they weren't all bottled up. And again, like that has a time and place, but what am I also then doing?
Mm.
And like, again, like I absolutely advocate for having support and having someone help guide you through those difficult times. But you're not meant to like be working with someone for your whole life.
Right.
Because it's like, well, then what progress has actually been made?
I mean, it can be, I can see circumstances, right, where like I am someone who keeps to myself. I don't have big friend groups, and maybe having a place to talk and not bottle things up could be helpful. But at the same time, I'm also very conscious of the fact that if I'm just ruminating on it and venting, I'm recreating that physically for my body.
Mhm.
Like to me, I'm at a place of peace where the night I, committed suicide, it wasn't um it's not this like god awful thing for me. Like I know what led up to that. I know how I was feeling. I remember those things and those moments very vividly, but it's not this like awful traumatic thing. It's something that it's the path that I walked. It doesn't benefit me to keep going to a therapist and talking about it because I'm just continuing to live that moment
Right.
over and over.
Yeah.
So I think really being mindful of what your treatment plan is really considering that it's someone who's empowering you and also encouraging you to build your identity. And what I mean by that is not seeing yourself as some damaged person who needs help, but someone who is doing work on their personal development and growth.
You are not a victim.
That's it. If you have a victim mentality, you will always be in the system.
You're going to be stuck because you just are so focused on these things happened to me, or these are the terrible circumstances that I'm in or have been in, that you can't get out of that.
Yeah.
And again, like it just keeps you stuck. So when we say like take action, like you are the only person who can take action. And that is a fact. No matter how much support you have from, a doctor or a coach or a therapist or whoever, you can be told all of these things and know and have this awareness, but you're the only one who can actually change your lifestyle, make different and better choices that support you in a holistic way, your body, your mind, your soul.
Yeah. And so let's start to transition into that. But I did want to just add to that, that was the realization for me that changed my life was like, I can go to the psychiatrist and get the pills and I can go to therapy and talk it out. But when it comes time to truly honor myself and my body and exercise, nobody can make that decision for me. I have to show up and be there and do the work.
Mhm.
And I always share that. That started with a minute and a half of jumping jacks.
Right.
And, we're sitting down to eat food, taking a breath and being grateful for the food and trying to put my body into a place where it was able to be grateful and be regulated while I ate and not overeat and be conscious. And so there's a lot to understand of like, absolutely build a support system, but you have to physically do the work yourself.
Yeah. So, health of your body, I kind of see these as like your foundations, like your basics of health.
I think these are like very much the foundation of like what people think of. When you think about taking care of yourself, it generally is the physical component.
Yeah. And until like you're physically not in a bad space, like your mental health will be affected because the two are so connected. And I know that we were reading that book, How to Be the Love You Seek, and she talks a lot about how she couldn't even start to like really work on her mental health until she was able to get her body in a place of health.
Yeah.
And so it's really just like your sleep. Are you sleeping and getting enough sleep? Your movement. We are not meant to just be sedentary beings. Like we have to move.
No.
So
most people I've ever come across in my life who say they have awful, incurable depression, they didn't move. They don't move. And that was what I went through. I was told I would be on meds for the rest of my life. I had it real bad and the whole thing. And I wasn't exercising. Nobody, made sure that that was something I was doing. So I think at the and this is just a non-negotiable for me. Like to take care of yourself, you need to move.
yeah, your nutrition. Are you eating completely ultra processed foods? Or are you actually eating whole, real foods? It's again, like we've said before, eating for dopamine or actually eating to fuel your body because food is meant to fuel you.
Yeah.
Fuel you.
But I mean, even, we just had a great conversation with someone, but like McDonald's, those French fries have to get off gassed for 5 days in a football stadium size warehouse before they can be consumed. And even then, they're not great to consume. But my point is, you're consuming that, it creates inflammation in your body. You're going to feel anxiety because your body is stressed out.
Right.
So it's like the food you consume absolutely is correlated to your mental chatter.
It's a huge, huge piece of it.
Yep.
And along the same lines as hydration.
Oh my God.
Like when we have realized plenty of times in the past, like, oh shoot, we're dehydrated. We are like in a state of starting to feel anxious.
That's
usually.
when I get anxious. I get anxious when I'm dehydrated. And like that's literally like my one sign these days. Like if I get anxious, I know I need electrolytes and water.
Yeah. And it's crazy because we talk about this all the time, but like when we were younger, like I
Nobody
didn't
drank
really
water.
drink water. I
Yeah.
just like drank milk and that was pretty much it for me. But if you're not drinking water, and I don't just mean one water bottle a day, I mean
No.
like we're up to right now, we're trying to drink like 100 ounces to like a gallon of water a day. Like hydrate.
Yeah, and there's a lot of ways to do that. There's also much deeper discussions there, like a lot of bottled water is acidic. But in general, there's ways to calculate this, but a good rule of thumb is 2/3 your body weight in ounces. So if you're 100 pounds, 66 ounces.
I mean, we're what, 70% water, our
Yeah.
body?
Yeah.
I mean, we need to continue to give ourselves
You
water.
need to replenish that.
And then lastly on body, and let me know if you have anything else to add, but getting outside and getting fresh air and sunshine and being in nature.
Sun is such a huge component, and it's becoming a much more talked about piece of the puzzle, especially in holistic communities and with naturopathic doctors. I think that we have to never let go of the fact that humans, throughout the centuries and the millennia, we've been outside. And even now, we are inside a lot. We don't get anywhere near as much sun. And that sun does so much for our energy levels, our sleep, our circadian rhythm. It does so much for just our body, walking barefoot on the earth and getting the electromagnetic field of the earth reduces inflammation. Scientifically studied. You can go look at it. Kate and I have a special bed sheet that plugs into the wall that is attached to the ground, which basically gives us the same frequencies while we're in bed and sleeping.
Yeah. But I mean, if you're someone who lives in a place that's cold in the winter, like we do,
Yep.
the difference between how I feel in the winter and summer, like it's finally like summer weather this week.
Yep.
And I'm like on fire. I got 22,000 steps yesterday because I didn't want to come inside.
Yeah.
Like I went on a walk and I was like, I came home and I was like, I'm going to mow the lawn. And then we did another walk later. Like I was like, let me be outside. And I felt incredible. And then I struggle in the winter because I'm not outside enough. And I have to like intentionally force myself to go out there because I don't love the cold. But just that alone like lets you see the huge difference between not getting enough time outside and when you do.
Yeah, and I mean, I would absolutely say we're a little lower in the winter. We're not as
Lower
chipper
energy.
and
Yeah.
uppity, but we do that every year. I mean, once the warmer weather comes, we generally have a week where there's not a lot getting done because we are like, let's get outside.
Literally
Let's go
like
for a walk,
recharging.
ride the bikes. Yeah. And we spend time outside and take time off because that is a priority for us to recharge, reconnect with nature. We've talked about phytoncides in the air. There's good beneficial compounds in the air. There's beneficial compounds by, standing barefoot on the grass. There's being outside, getting the sun. So I think, I'll conclude this section with, I believe it's Japan, where they would actually prescribe forest bathing, where you actually go out into the forest and that is your medical treatment. And you're absorbing those compounds in the air. You might be barefoot, absorbing the frequencies of the earth. You're getting the sun, being around trees and listening to branches ruffling, that like there's all sorts of medicinal elements to just being in a forest. And that's a legitimate treatment that's used.
I wish that was prescribed here, but it wouldn't make anybody any money.
Yeah, exactly.
So body. I mean, that's body.
Yep.
So now let's get into mind. And, working on your own mind and your mindset takes work. Like your core beliefs are programmed into your subconscious mind based on how you were raised and the things that you took on when you grew up. So our brain is still very much forming into our 20s, but like that core age, those core beliefs are really formed from like ages like 0 to 7.
Hmm.
And whatever you're taking in, those are kind of the beliefs that you have. And so your subconscious looks back at those beliefs and helps you to just take action based on those beliefs in your everyday life. So if you were told at a young age you can't do something, then 30 years later, you still have that same belief and you're still running your life based on that.
Mm.
So it takes work to go back and look at what beliefs you have, where they came from, and how that's actually affecting your entire life today.
Yeah, I think the mental component, obviously very important for us to discuss on this episode, but it's also something that isn't as like tangible for people. Like people say, "Oh, I'm going to take time to work on me," and they often don't. And so that mental component isn't as straightforward as go to the gym and exercise or, take a look at your diet. It's, do I have a gratitude practice? Am I taking time to feel good things for what I do have in my life?
And being intentional about that, right?
Right. Am I focusing my energy and my attention on what I do have rather than what I lack? Am I holding expectations or assumptions over people that aren't communicated or over myself? Am I shooting all over myself?
Hmm.
You know? So the mental component is really that deep shadow work that requires you to sit alone in a room with yourself and talk some things out. What
Yeah,
limiting beliefs do I have? What's
right.
holding me back? And I think that, for me personally, a lot of that was thinking I wouldn't succeed if I didn't go do a 9 to 5. There were beliefs I had about how much money I could earn. There were beliefs I had about my capacity for greatness, for doing something meaningful. Um, I had beliefs about my family that held me back. I believed certain people should do certain things, or um, even just me believing I should be in better shape, right? But again, I had to show up and do the work. And we've talked about that, right? But the mental aspect of this is closely tied to your physical aspect. So, like in the case of exercise, you might not get to the gym or believe you could be successful in the gym because you hold this mental belief of your identity that you are overweight or you're just someone who, you know, you're just not in shape or you're big boned or whatever it is. So we hold those beliefs, but we don't always acknowledge how they affect other areas of our lives and of our health.
Hmm. And we don't like take a step back to understand where those like beliefs even came from.
Mm.
And so much of our life is, again, run by our subconscious mind. Like 95% of our life is run by our subconscious mind, meaning like we're repeating the same thoughts, the same habits, the same actions every single day, because that is what our subconscious is programmed to do. You're running on autopilot, and it takes being conscious to actually start to understand like, hey, that's actually what's going on.
Yeah.
Well, I don't have to believe that way. I don't have to think that way, but I have to actually take a moment to become conscious and recognize that that's what's happening and that I do have the ability to change it. I don't have to think this way. I don't have to act this way.
Right.
Like having negative thoughts and like being stuck in that negative thought pattern, that is a habit.
That's a
And
really important point.
so many people just get stuck in that habit and the negativity just continues and it goes on and on. And that is like who you are. And you see yourself as this negative or pessimistic person because you're stuck there.
Yep. I think that's a really important point, especially for everything that I went through. I never, and my life didn't change until I started working on the way that I spoke to myself. And a big, a core piece of that was I was very pessimistic, and that didn't shift and I didn't become healthier until I started actually my gratitude practice, because gratitude gave me the ability to start to look on the positive side of things, to start to pay attention to what was being said. And that was where meditation came in for me, was being present, being able to say, why did I just say that to myself? What does that mean? Okay, well, that's a limiting belief, or, that's very negative. and starting to say, like, how can I rewrite that in a more positive way? How
Mhm.
can I be grateful for something here instead?
Yeah.
Um, and that's a really important part of that self discovery process.
And that is creating your identity. Like you said, like who you believe you are
Mm,
is your identity, and that is going to be at the base of everything else that happens in your life and the actions that you take. And, what you kind of like what you create.
it's a foundational piece of manifesting.
Yeah.
What you believe is going to become your reality.
Right. I used to say I was super pessimistic too. And I used to just be like, I'm pessimistic. And it was just like on repeat. I would just say that. It's like, of course, I'm going to continue to be pessimistic if that's what I'm identifying as.
Right.
I'm not going to be able to look at something in an optimistic view.
And I think that's what's so tricky, right? Is because like you can take steps to not be so pessimistic, but if you still believe that you are a pessimistic person, those steps will only do so much.
Yeah.
You have to address the beliefs.
Right. And you can change your beliefs just because you've
Absolutely.
believed something for 20, 30 years, whatever it is, like, doesn't mean it has to continue to be true. You can change them.
Your neural circuits, neuroplasticity, you can rewire your mind. That
Yeah.
is not as simple as it sounds, but you can do it.
Right. Well, that's what we're saying as far as it takes work, and it's every day being intentional with where you desire to be.
Yeah.
And lastly, soul, because I don't think this component is talked about as much.
I feel like
Um,
not at all.
and I feel like this is something I've definitely struggled with, but I feel like you maybe even struggled with it even more because you didn't really have a huge sense of like fulfillment or purpose when you were like, what am I doing with my
Mm,
life? Like, what is my career going to look like? Or what is my job going to look like? You just knew you didn't want to be a 9 to 5. And then you felt terribly about that and was like, well, what can I do?
yeah, I think I knew like what I absolutely did not want to do, but I didn't have an answer in another direction. So, yeah, I mean, it was really difficult. I think that, and I see this most often is with young people, a lot of college students. Um, you just don't have that purpose yet. You haven't really lived and had life experiences yet to where you know what you want to do and you do know what feels good. Um, for me, no, I never worked a 9 to 5, but I worked in offices, 3 days a week, 4 days a week sometimes. And I did it enough to know it was absolutely not an option to me. I don't believe anyone needs that kind of time from me. And, I'm a big research and analytics guy and looking at the data, 4 to 6 hours is the average time someone works when they're in an office. So you have an 8, 10, 12 hour workday to get 4 to 6 hours of work done. You know, I think it's different for everybody, but I think finding your fulfillment, your purpose is really a core component of how you start to rewrite and figure yourself out and support yourself holistically. Because I knew, okay, I want to be an entrepreneur. I want to, do the marketing work, but on my own time. And that empowered me to start to take the steps to support a business, to support that dream, to chase that goal, to set sub goals and create and craft my identity around that goal.
Yeah. And for me, I did work in, a 9 to 5 job and I did not like it. And it wasn't just like the fact that I was in an office and sitting in a cubicle. I didn't feel purpose and fulfillment behind the work that I was doing. Like I was
Mm,
building websites and managing website projects for like banks and credit unions. And I just like could not care less.
yeah.
I was like, cool, a bank website. Awesome. Like it didn't matter. It didn't feel like I was making a difference. And so that sense of like fulfillment and purpose wasn't there for me.
Yeah. I think, for me personally, a lot of it was also just time. Like I was spending so much time around people who were complaining, who like they weren't not that you were complaining, but they weren't fulfilled.
I
They
was
weren't.
definitely complaining.
Well, there you go. They didn't have purpose in the work. And, I always think about that quote, like, you spend time around five idiots, you'll be the sixth.
Right.
And it seemed silly to me to spend so much time around people who didn't have goals, they didn't have ambitions, they just complained, everything was everyone else's fault, and they were so willing to accept things as they were and not question and not take a step for themselves or prioritize themselves.
Yeah.
So I think when you do that, you kind of step out of the matrix and like really figure out what designing your identity means.
Yeah. And I think at the core of that, it's really discovering what is the most important thing to you. For us, it was like our freedom, and that's
Yeah.
why we became entrepreneurs. But, for someone else, they're perfectly fine working a 9 to 5, and that's great. But they feel good about what they're doing in that time, and
Yeah.
they don't dread it, and they don't hate what they're doing. There's plenty of jobs out there like that, but if you're just like accepting where you're at, even though you don't like it and you're dreading every next day, of course it's going to affect your mental health and your mental well being, because the majority of how you're spending your time is in a state of like, meh.
Yeah. So I think to kind of wrap that all up and conclude, I have never seen anyone who did the deep work, did the shadow work on their mindset, who supported themselves physically and took actionable steps to support their soul. I have never seen anyone do all those things and not get away from this idea of mental illness.
Right.
Everyone I've ever seen do that is thriving.
Yeah. And they understand that they may still feel those feelings once in a while, and it's normal to feel feelings.
Yeah, and they have that same perspective that we've shared today of it's something that you might experience as a part of the human experience in life. It doesn't mean you're doomed for this lifelong disease.
Yeah.
And I can proudly say that as someone who was pretty deep in that system and turned it all around.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anything else to share?
No, that was a lot.
That was longer than I thought it would be, but
It was, but this is a topic that we're both very
mm.
passionate about, so I hope it's helpful.
Well, I hope everyone listening got value out of that. Thank you guys for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.